She walked into the supermarket, her worn-out sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum floor, a handwritten resume on printer paper inside a cardboard folder. The young managers laughed, joked about her not knowing how to apply online, said the positions were only for people who could keep up with the pace. But when she finally revealed who she really was and why she desperately needed that minimum wage job to survive, the entire store fell silent, and some people cried. Margaret Ann Holloway, Maggie to those who knew her before life got tough, stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her small apartment and practiced her smile. Not her real one, but the one that showed all the wrinkles, the weariness, and the defeat. The one she had perfected over the last 7 months of job hunting. The one that said, "I am competent. I am energetic. I am exactly what you are looking for." She was 62 years old. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied the drugstore lipstick she had bought on sale 3 weeks ago. Red fruit happiness, the label said, though there was nothing wonderful about it. The fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed and flickered, just as it had been doing for the past month. She had tried to fix it herself with a YouTube tutorial and everything, but the owner still hadn't returned her calls about a proper replacement. The apartment was small. A studio, technically. Those studios sounded artistic and intentional, rather than what it really was. Cramped, outdated, and the only thing she could afford after everything else fell apart. 480 square feet of old carpet, a compact kitchen with 1990s appliances, and a window overlooking a laundromat parking lot. The rent was $875 a month, which seemed like a bargain until you factored in that she was living on $1,247 in Social Security benefits and what was left in her rapidly dwindling savings account. She had worked for 37 years. 37 years waking up at dawn, of performance reviews and promotions, and of that gold badge they gave her on her 25th birthday at Henderson and Mark's Insurance. She had been an office manager, good manager. She trained 17 people during her time at the company, managed the schedules of a team of 42 people, and implemented a new filing system that saved the company thousands of dollars annually in document retrieval time. And then, 18 months ago, they called her into a conference room with frosted glass walls and talked about a restructuring. "It's nothing personal, Maggie," said Brian Henderson III, without looking directly at her. He was 41 years old, had just completed his MBA at Northwestern, and had been at the helm of the company for only 6 months. "We're migrating to a more digitally focused operating model. Your role, however valuable it may have been, simply doesn't align with our new strategic direction. It doesn't align, as if his 3 decades of dedication were a font that didn't match the new letterhead. They gave her 3 months severance pay. They shook her hand. They took photos for the company newsletter about her retirement. She smiled in those photos too. That same rehearsed smile she was now sporting in front of the bathroom mirror. She didn't tell them she wasn't going to retire. She simply thanked them. And then she went back home, to the house she shared with Tom, her husband of 34 years, and cried for the first time in a decade. Tom hugged her that night. He told her everything would be all right. He said they would figure something out. 3 weeks later, he suffered a heart attack. Maggie forced herself to stop staring at her reflection. Dwelling on the past wouldn't help her today. Today was grocery day. She had passed by the store hundreds of times over the years, maybe even more. It was one of those huge discount store chains that seem to exist in every mid-sized American city, selling everything from groceries to electronics and auto parts. The kind of place where you could buy a gallon of milk, a lawnmower, and a birthday cake, all in a single visit. The building itself was an architectural statement of pure function over form, a huge rectangular box with blue and yellow signs, a parking lot that held what looked like 500 cars, and an attached garden center that sold plants and outdoor furniture from March to October. She had never imagined that one day she would apply for a job there, but there she was. She picked up the brown paper folder from the kitchen counter, the one containing her resume, printed on the nice paper she'd bought specifically for job applications. 11-pound cotton paper, ivory-colored, professional. She'd spent 2 hours in the library using the computers and printer to create it, watching YouTube tutorials on how to format a resume for today's job market. The librarian, a kind woman named Patricia, who looked to be in her early 30s, had helped her, though Maggie had noticed the fleeting look of pity in Patricia's eyes when she explained what she was doing. "Most companies now require you to apply online," Patricia said kindly, "through their websites. They have systems called applicant tracking systems, ATS. They do keyword searches." Maggie nodded, feeling the weight of age on her shoulders like a heavy coat. "I tried that. I applied to 93 jobs online in the last 7 months. I didn't get a response from any of them. Patricia was silent for a moment, and in that silence Maggie heard everything the young woman couldn't say aloud. It's because they can see your graduation year. It's because your experience makes you overqualified on paper but considered too old in practice. It's because the algorithms filter you out before a human even sees your name. So I'm going to use the traditional method, Maggie continued, forcing an upbeat tone. I'm going to go in, hand over a printed resume, and make them see me as a person, not just a birth date. Patricia smiled sadly but genuinely. I think that's clever. Very clever. Now standing in her small apartment with that carefully crafted resume in hand, Maggie wondered if this was truly a clever move or just desperation disguised as strategy. She looked at the microwave clock. 7:03 a.m. The supermarket opened at 7 a.m. She had calculated this meticulously. Early enough so that the store wouldn't yet be crowded, and late enough so that the managers were already there and settled in. She had read articles about job search strategies. She had done her research. She grabbed her purse, a faux leather bag she'd had for 6 years, whose strap was beginning to fray at the edges, and her car keys. The car was a 2009 Honda Civic with 294,500 kilometers on the odometer. A dent in the rear passenger side door from a parking lot collision 4 years ago, and the check engine light had been on for 8 months. She didn't have the money to fix it, and the car still ran, so she simply ignored the light, just like she'd been ignoring a lot of things lately. The drive to the supermarket took 12 minutes. 12 minutes rehearsing what she would say, how she would introduce herself, what smile she would wear. 12 minutes watching the sun rise over the shopping malls, fast food restaurants, and warehouses that lined Highway 41. 12 minutes trying not to think about the fact that her bank account had $1,847. The rent was due in 9 days. Her medication cost $247 a month, even with Medicare. And she still owed $3,200 for Tom's funeral expenses. One thing at a time, she said to herself. One thing at a time. The supermarket parking lot was practically empty when she arrived. A few cars were parked near the main entrance, employees, she imagined. A delivery truck was parked near the loading dock on the side of the building. Some early morning customers were pushing carts toward their vehicles. Maggie parked in the middle of the parking lot, not too close to the entrance. She didn't want to seem presumptuous, taking up a good spot when she wasn't even a customer, really. Not today. She checked her reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. Her hair was combed and styled, pulled back in a simple updo. Her makeup was understated. Her outfit had been carefully chosen. A navy blue blouse she'd owned for years, but which still looked professional. Khaki pants, and those sneakers. The sneakers had been a calculated choice. She'd considered wearing her more elegant shoes, the black low-heeled flats, but had read that retail jobs required standing for long periods and walking a lot. The sneakers showed that she understood this, that she was practical, prepared, or at least that's what she hoped they would demonstrate. She took a deep breath, grabbed her briefcase, and got out of the car. The automatic doors swung open with a whistle as she approached, releasing a burst of air conditioning and that characteristic supermarket smell, a mixture of cleaning products. Cardboard, plastic packaging, snack bar popcorn, and something else she could never quite identify. Institutional, perhaps. Corporate. Inside, the store was enormous. Aisles upon aisles stretched before it, bright fluorescent lights buzzing above, cheerful yellow promotional signs hanging from the ceiling. To its left was the customer service counter, currently unattended. To its right, the cash registers, most closed at this hour of the morning, only 2 open with bored-looking attendants staring at their screens. Ahead, the aisles began. Groceries, household goods, toys, electronics, everything one could possibly need. All under one roof, and sold at prices that have driven countless small businesses out of business over the past 3 decades. Maggie had shopped there countless times over the years. Her daughter's birthday parties, grocery shopping, Christmas shopping. That time she needed to buy Tom new work boots at the last minute. She'd walk those aisles as a customer, just another face in the crowd, someone with money to spend and commitments. Now she was there begging for a job that probably paid $11.50 an hour. Don't think like that, she scolded herself. Maintain a positive attitude. Maintain confidence. She spotted a young woman in a blue Supermart vest near the customer service counter, fiddling with her cell phone. Maggie approached, trying to convey confidence without arrogance, friendliness without desperation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little louder than she intended. "I'd like to know who I should speak to about the possibility of applying for a job." The young woman looked up, and Maggie immediately guessed her age, her early 20s, maybe 23 or 24. She had long brown hair tied in a high ponytail, Impeccable makeup, cat-eye eyeliner, and contoured cheekbones. A style Maggie had seen on her granddaughters. Instagram, but had never been able to replicate. An expression of slight surprise that quickly turned into something Maggie couldn't decipher. Double. Quotes. The girl looked around as if searching for help. Are you here to apply, like for a job? Yes, said Maggie, maintaining her smile. My resume is here. She lifted the brown paper folder slightly. The girl's eyes turned to the folder and something changed in her expression. Not exactly hostile, more like ... amused? Confused? Okay, so, like most people apply online? Through our website? We have a complete careers portal and everything. I understand, Maggie said without losing her smile. But I was hoping to speak to someone in person, to properly introduce myself. The girl whose name tag read Bria tilted her head. That's very old-fashioned. But I think I can see if anyone from management is available. Which position were you applying for? Any role you have available, Maggie said. Cashier, stocker, customer service. I'm flexible. Bria's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you ... serious? The question carried more weight than it should have. In those 3 words, Maggie heard everything. You're too old for this. You don't belong here. What are you even doing here? But she kept smiling. Completely serious. Okay. Wait a minute. Bria placed her cell phone on the customer service counter and picked up a walkie-talkie that was clipped to her belt. She pressed the button. Hey, Jason. Yes. Is there anyone in customer service who wants to talk about, like, a job opening? In person? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, thanks. She turned to Maggie. Someone will be coming up in a few minutes. Thank you so much, Maggie said in a kind tone. I really appreciate your help. Bria nodded, but had already picked up her phone again, turning her attention back to whatever had been occupying her before Maggie interrupted her. Maggie took a step back, positioning herself near but not directly in front of the customer service counter. Trying to appear professional without being intrusive, she watched the store slowly come alive around her. More employees emerged from the back of the store, pushing carts laden with merchandise, restocking shelves, adjusting the displays. A few more customers entered through the main door. A woman with a small crying child headed straight for the food section. An elderly gentleman in a veteran's cap walked slowly toward the pharmacy in the back corner. She waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Maggie shifted her weight from one foot to the other, aware of the pain she was beginning to feel in her lower back. She'd been standing for less than 15 minutes and her body was already complaining. Is this what you want to do? Her body seemed to be asking for it. Working on your feet for 8-hour shifts. Restocking shelves? Operating a cash register? Try, she replied silently, because I have no choice. At 14 minutes, a young man approached from the direction of the back offices. He appeared to be in his early 20s or 30s, perhaps 30 at most, with neatly combed hair, a trimmed beard, and the same blue Supermart vest that Bria wore, although his had additional pins and a name tag that read Jason, assistant manager. Hello, he said, extending his hand as he approached. I'm Jason Miller, one of the assistant managers here. Bria said you wanted to talk about employment. His handshake was firm, professional. But Maggie noticed how quickly his eyes assessed her upon seeing her for the first time, from head to toe in about 2 seconds. The kind of rapid assessment that was largely unconscious, but of which she had become acutely aware over the past 7 months. She saw the exact moment when her age became clear to him. She saw the slight confusion, the recalculation happening behind his eyes. Yes, she said, maintaining her smile and confident posture. My name is Margaret Holloway, and I am very interested in any positions you have available. I have extensive experience in customer service and office administration, and I am very dedicated to my work. She handed him the brown paper folder containing her resume, and Jason took it, though she noticed his smile had become a little more forced. That's great, he said in a friendly tone, but now with an underlying hint of something more. Uncertainty, perhaps. He opened the folder and glanced at the resume, his eyes scanning it quickly. Too fast to be really reading, Maggie thought. Just looking. So Mrs. Holloway, ma'am, she corrected gently. But Maggie is fine. Okay, Maggie. So I see you have quite a bit of experience in insurance management. And that's impressive. Very impressive indeed. But you know that the positions we have here are mostly entry-level, cashier, stocker, shopping cart attendant, that sort of thing. I'm aware, Maggie said, and I'm genuinely interested in those positions. Jason's smile was definitely forced now. Well, the thing is, I have to be honest with you, Maggie. Most people with your level of experience would be overqualified for what we're offering here. The starting salary is minimum wage, $11.50 an hour. Shifts can be part-time or full-time. depending on availability and what you're looking for, but the full-time positions are mainly for restocking overnight. The job is quite physically demanding. It involves standing for long periods, lifting heavy objects, and moving merchandise. He was trying to dissuade her, in a gentle and professional manner, but definitely trying to get her to exclude herself from that conversation of her own accord. Maggie nodded. I understand all of that. I'm looking for a stable job, and I'm prepared for the physical demands. I keep myself active. A little white lie. She walked 30 minutes a day around the condominium, but active was a generous term. Her knees ached, her back ached. She got breathless climbing stairs, but she needed that job. Jason shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking at the resume again. And, we do all our scheduling through a computerized system. Employees have to use a smartphone app to check their hours, request time off, swap shifts, all that. It's all digital. There it was. It wasn't even subtle anymore. You're too old. You won't understand the technology. You'll be a burden. Maggie pulled her cell phone out of her bag, a 3-year-old iPhone, say, but one that still worked perfectly. I'm used to smartphones and apps. I've been using them for years. Jason's expression wavered, surprise perhaps, but he quickly recovered. That's great. That's really great. Well, here's the thing, Maggie. I appreciate you coming, really. That shows initiative, but our hiring process is entirely online. We have an application portal on our website where you enter all your information, take some personality tests, that sort of thing. And if your application is approved, we'll contact you to schedule a formal interview. I've already tried to register online, Maggie said, and she couldn't hide the frustration in her voice. Several times, actually, for this store and several others. I never get a response. Well, we've received a lot of applications, Jason said, his tone shifting to something more distant, more corporate. Hundreds, to be honest. So not everyone gets a response, but if you fit the profile, someone from HR will definitely get in touch. The conversation was drawing to a close. She could feel it slipping through her fingers. Jason, she said, dropping some of the rehearsed animation in her voice and revealing the reality. I need a job. I'm not looking for a career. I don't want to climb the corporate ladder to a management position. I just need a stable income. I'm reliable. I'm responsible. And I promise I can handle any entry-level position you have here. Jason's expression softened slightly, but not in a helpful way. It was a pity. She hated that look. I believe in you, he said, I really do. But I can't just hire people on the spot, even if I wanted to. It's company policy. Everything goes through the online system. Background checks, proof of eligibility, all of that. I don't have the authority to ignore the process. So could you explain to me how to fill out the online form or tell me what I might be doing wrong? I don't have access to individual applications. That's managed by the company's HR department. But I can tell you that the system uses some algorithms to filter candidates based on qualifications, availability, and things like that. So if you're not getting a response, it might be that the system is selecting other candidates who are... He stopped short. Who are what? Maggie asked, even though she already knew the answer. Who are? More suitable for what we're looking for, Jason concluded, avoiding her gaze. Younger, that's what he meant. He meant younger. The silence between them lasted for a long and uncomfortable moment. Thank you for your time, Maggie finally said, taking her resume back from Jason's hands. Her voice was firm, but inside she felt something crumbling. No problem, said Jason, relief written all over his face, and definitely register online. You never know, the system might need more complete information. He was already walking away, mentally moving on to his next task, his next responsibility, his next problem that wasn't a 62-year-old woman asking for a minimum wage job. Thank you, said Maggie, although she wasn't sure what she was thanking her for. She went back through the automatic doors, crossed the parking lot, and got into her car. She sat there for a long time, staring at the brown paper folder in her lap, the carefully crafted resume that no one wanted to see. Proof of a lifetime of work that somehow meant nothing now. She didn't cry. She had already cried enough. Instead, she started the car and drove home, already planning her next attempt. There was a Burger Bob's on the same street as her building. They'd had a help wanted sign in the window for 3 weeks. Perhaps they were different. They weren't. Over the next 4 weeks, Maggie applied for 37 jobs. She went into a Target store and was told to sign up online. She went into a Wendy's and was told that they were only hiring high school students for summer positions. She walked into a CVS pharmacy and a manager who couldn't have been more than 26 years old told her they were looking for someone with more energy. She walked into a Home Depot store and went through a real interview. 45 minutes of questions about her availability, her experience, and her ability to lift 22 kilos repeatedly. The interviewer, a middle-aged man named Rick, who seemed genuinely kind, nodded, took notes, and said she would receive an answer in a week. She never received a reply. She walked into a Dollar General store and the cashier said, without even consulting management, that they weren't hiring at the moment. Maggie could see the employee wanted sign in the window behind the cashier's head. She applied online to a supermarket chain, a pharmacy chain, 2 different fast food chains, a gas station, a hotel chain looking for housekeepers, a school district needing cafeteria staff, a commercial building looking for cleaning staff, and a call center. Not a single callback. She broadened her search radius. She drove 48 kilometers to the neighboring town, 42 kilometers to the big city. She went into stores in neighborhoods she had never been to, spoke with managers who always gave her the same variations of the same message. Apply online, we will contact you. Thank you for your interest. The rejection wasn't always explicit. Sometimes it was subtle, a forced smile, a quick glance at her age on her driver's license while she was filling out a paper application form, a comment about the physical demands of the job, a mention of keeping pace with our younger team, a statement about fitting the company culture or team dynamics, and sometimes, very rarely, he was honest. Look, I'll be honest with you, said a manager at a Pizza Palace pizzeria after a brief conversation. He was around 40 years old, looked tired, and had grease stains on his uniform shirt. Headquarters is pressuring us to hire younger people. They want that energy, that vibe. They think that attracts customers. I don't make the rules, I just follow them. I'm sorry. Maggie nodded, thanked him for his honesty, and left. That night, she opened a bottle of wine that had been stored in the cupboard for 2 years, a gift from a coworker of Tom's after his promotion, back when they had promotions to celebrate, and drank half of it sitting on her battered sofa, watching a rerun of a sitcom on her old television. She thought about calling her daughter Emily, who lived in Oregon with her husband and 2 children. Emily called every Sunday religiously, always cheerful, always asking how Maggie was, what she had done if she needed anything. And every Sunday Maggie lied, I'm great, darling. Keeping busy. Just enjoying this phase of life. She couldn't tell Emily the truth. I couldn't tell her I'd spent the grocery money on gas to go to job interviews. I couldn't tell her I'd started buying generic drugs instead of brand name ones because, even with health insurance, the costs were piling up. I couldn't tell her I'd sold most of Tom's tools, the golf clubs, and that old dresser they found at a property auction 20 years ago just to pay last month's rent. Emily had her own life, her own problems. 2 children in elementary school, a husband who had just had his salary reduced at work, a mortgage on a house that needed a new roof. Emily didn't need to know that her mother was 1 car repair away from financial ruin. So Maggie kept the truth to herself and continued applying. The days began to blend together. Waking up, checking job sites online, printing new resumes at the library, driving to another store, another restaurant, another establishment, smiling, explaining, hearing yet another variation of no, driving home, eating whatever was cheapest in the pantry, watching television, something she wasn't really watching, going to bed, repeating. The balance in his savings account fell to less than 1,500 United States dollars. So, below 1,000 United States dollars. The check engine light was now accompanied by a strange rattling noise when she accelerated. She ignored it. She started shopping exclusively at the dollar store, buying everything by store brand, rationing the good coffee she used to allow herself, and switching to the cheapest instant coffee she could find. She stopped going to the movies, something she used to do once a month as a small treat. She stopped getting her hair cut at the salon, learning to trim it herself with kitchen scissors while watching YouTube tutorials. She stopped buying new clothes when her old ones wore out, instead mending them by hand with needle and thread. She became invisible in the same way that elderly people without money become invisible in America, present but invisible, trying but ignored, surviving but not living. And throughout all this time she continued to apply, because after all, what else could she do? Chapter 3, Supermarket, again, one Thursday morning in late September. 3 months after her first visit to Supermart, Maggie found herself entering that same parking lot once again. She had seen the posters, signs in the shop windows, hiring, competitive salaries. Apply today, in smaller print, all shifts available. Immediate openings. She knew it was probably pointless. She knew that apply today almost certainly still meant apply online through our system that filters people like you. But desperation had eroded her sense of futility. Her rent was due in 6 days and she needed $200. Her phone bill was overdue. She had received a notice from her car insurance company that her policy would be canceled if she didn't pay by the end of the month. She needed a job. Any job. Even the one that had already rejected her. So she parked the car, grabbed a new copy of her resume, and went back through those automatic doors. The store looked exactly the same. The same layout, the same products, the same fluorescent lights buzzing from the ceiling. It was mid-morning, 9:37 a.m., according to the clock near the customer service counter, and the store was moderately busy. Customers strolled through the aisles, employees restocked the shelves, the constant beeping of barcode scanners at the checkout counters. Maggie approached the customer service counter. This time it was a different employee, an older woman, perhaps in her 50s, with short gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. "Good morning," said Maggie. "I was wondering if I could speak to someone about the job openings I saw advertised." The woman looked up from whatever she was doing, and her expression immediately became more understanding than Bria's had been 3 months ago. "Oh dear, you need to register online. They don't accept in-person registrations here." "I've applied online several times," Maggie said. "I was hoping to be able to speak to someone in person. Perhaps there's a specific position I should apply for, or some additional information I should include in my application." The woman's expression softened even further. "I understand, believe me. The system they use, it's not the best. But I really don't think showing up in person will help. Hiring decisions are all made by headquarters, not by the store managers. Is there a manager I can speak to, just to introduce myself?" The woman hesitated, and Maggie could see the internal debate unfolding. Finally, she sighed. "I'll call someone for you, but I'm warning you, it probably won't make a difference." "I appreciate your attempt," Maggie said sincerely. The woman picked up the phone from the table and made a call. After a brief, muffled conversation, she hung up. "Someone will leave in a minute, thanks." Maggie waited again. This time the wait was shorter, maybe 5 minutes. When the manager appeared, Maggie's stomach clenched. It was Jason, the same assistant manager from 3 months ago. He recognized her immediately. She saw it in his face. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, and this time there was no warmth in his voice. Professional, but cold. "We spoke a few months ago, didn't we?" "Yes, we did," Maggie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I saw that you're hiring again and wanted to confirm the contact. I kept applying online, but haven't received a response yet and was hoping to hear back. I'm going to interrupt you here," Jason said, his tone shifting from calm to something bordering on irritation. "I explained last time that our hiring process is entirely online. Repeatedly coming in person isn't going to change that. In fact, it's kind of disrupting our operations. Annoying." She was causing trouble by asking for a job. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Maggie said, struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm just trying to find work. I understand that. But that's not how it's done." Jason crossed his arms. "Look, I'll be frank with you. Based on your resume and qualifications, you're overqualified for the positions we have available. Companies like supermarts look for people who will stay in entry-level roles, not people who might get bored or frustrated after a few weeks and leave. It's about retention." "I wasn't going to leave," Maggie said. "You say that now, but I wouldn't quit because I need this job," Maggie interrupted, and heard her voice falter slightly. "I'm not overqualified. I'm just qualified enough, which is to be able and willing to work." Jason's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, but I can't help. Our HR department handles all hiring and uses specific criteria to evaluate candidates. If you're not getting any responses, that's their decision, not mine. So what should I do?" Maggie asked, and she hated the pleading tone that had risen in her voice. "Look for something that better suits your skills," Jason suggested, as if it were that simple, as if she hadn't been trying for months. A young couple walked past them, pushing a shopping cart full of groceries, chatting lightly and cheerfully. They didn't even look at Maggie and Jason. Why would they? Just another employee and another customer having a mundane interaction. But it wasn't something trivial, not for Maggie. "I had skills," she said quietly. "I had a career, and then I was laid off through restructuring because they wanted someone younger and cheaper. And now I can't get a job anywhere because I'm either too old or too experienced, or both. So I'd love to know what I should do because I've been trying to figure this out for months and haven't found an answer." Jason's face contorted. "I'm sorry about your situation. Truly. But I can't change company policy. I'm not asking for a change in policy. I'm asking for an opportunity. And I tell you that this opportunity needs to come through the official application process." They were going around in circles. Maggie could feel it. She felt the conversation was heading down the same dead end where all the conversations of the last few months had ended. "All right," she said, her voice monotone. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, but Jason called her back. "Esra Holloway?" She stopped, but didn't turn around. "I sincerely hope you find something, but perhaps try looking for opportunities that are more suited to your profile. Administrative work, office positions, that sort of thing." The condescending tone of his voice made her clench her teeth. "I've already tried that," she said without looking at him. "They don't want me either." And then she drove out through the automatic doors, crossed the parking lot, and returned to her car with the check engine light on, the noisy acceleration, and its 183,000 kilometers of slowly deteriorating parts. She sat in the driver's seat and stared intently at the steering wheel. And for the first time in months, she couldn't rehearse another smile, couldn't plan another application, couldn't imagine another rejection. She sat there and allowed herself to feel the full weight of how completely and utterly desperate the situation had become. That night, Maggie received an email. It happened at 11:47 p.m., after she had already gone to bed, after scrolling through her phone's feed looking at job ads she couldn't apply for, after doing the math on her checkbook for the 5th time, hoping the numbers would somehow add up differently. They didn't have it. She had $843 in her checking account and $512 in her savings account. Her rent was $875 and was due in 5 days. The email notification arrived, and she almost ignored it. Late-night emails were usually spam or automated messages from companies she'd applied to months ago, finally sending her rejection letters of the "thank you for your interest, but we've decided to proceed with other candidates" type. But something made her look. The email subject was RA job vacancy inquiry, supermarket, store number 3847. Her heart gave a strange little jump. She opened the email. Dear Ms. Holloway, thank you for your continued interest in job opportunities at Supermart. After reviewing your most recent application and following up on your in-person visit today, we would like to invite you for a formal interview. We have several job openings available that may be suitable for your profile, including cashier part-time and full-time shifts available, sales area attendant various departments, customer service counter attendant, night shift replacement assistant full-time. Please reply to this email indicating your availability for an interview next week. Our hiring manager, Derek Patterson, will be conducting interviews on Monday and Wednesday of next week, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We look forward to the opportunity to speak with you. Sincerely, Supermarket HR Department, location number 3847. Maggie read it 3 times, convinced she was misunderstanding something. An interview. They were offering her an interview. After months of nothing, after Jason's dismissal this morning, after all the other rejections, they were offering her an interview. She felt something unfamiliar course through her chest. Not exactly hope, she had learned to distrust hope, but something close to it, a possibility, a crack in the wall of rejection that had surrounded her for so long. She typed a reply immediately. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm available any day and time that is best for you. Monday, Wednesday, or any other day works for me. I greatly appreciate your consideration and look forward to meeting with Mr. Patterson. Yours sincerely, Margaret Holloway. She clicked send before she could rethink her words. Then she lay back down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart beating faster than it should, trying not to let her emotions get the better of her, trying not to imagine what it could all mean. An interview wasn't a job. She knew that. An interview was just another opportunity to be rejected, only this time in person, instead of through algorithmic filters. But it was something. It was more than she had eaten yesterday. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, fell asleep without that crushing weight of utter despair pressing on her chest. Continued. The story continues with the Monday interview, where Maggie meets Derek Patterson and a team of young supervisors who subject her to escalating waves of subtle and explicit discrimination, humiliation that builds throughout the day of the interview, her silent dignity in the face of scorn, and eventually the revelation of her tragic past, the medical debt stemming from Tom's death, the reason she needs this minimum wage job to survive, and the promise she made. This will extend over 60,000 to 70,000 words, following all 8 stages of narrative structure with deep psychological detail, authentic dialogue from the American working class, multiple antagonists undergoing transformation arcs, and finally, a resolution that reveals Maggie's hidden expertise and leads to systemic change at Supermart regarding age discrimination, impacting thousands of workers across the country. The story will include specific details about healthcare costs in the United States, the inadequacy of Social Security, the failures of the gig economy for older workers, and the devastating reality of age discrimination in low-paying jobs. Monday morning arrived cloudy. Maggie woke up at 5:30 a.m., an hour before her alarm went off. She'd been waking up earlier and earlier lately. Her body no longer trusted sleep. It no longer felt comfortable remaining unconscious for long, as if it were afraid that something crucial might happen if she wasn't awake to observe. The light streaming through the apartment window was gray and dim, the kind of November light that seemed to suck all the color out of the world. She lay on the bed for a few minutes, feeling her heart race. Interview day. It was really happening. She spent Sunday getting ready. She ironed her navy blue blouse twice. The first time wasn't perfect, so she ironed it again. She looked for her nicest dress pants, opting for the khaki pair she'd worn to the supermarket 3 months ago, making sure there were no stains or wrinkles. She decided whether to wear flats or sneakers, ultimately choosing flats because she wanted to look more professional, even though they were a little tight and had given her blisters the last time she wore them. She practiced her presentation in front of the mirror, observing her mouth movements, trying to convey confidence without desperation. She had also done something she hadn't done in weeks, allowed herself to imagine success. What if they hired her? What if today was the turning point? What if she left the supermarket this afternoon with a job offer? She did the math in her head, a calculation she'd done dozens of times before. If she worked full-time for $15 an hour, if she were lucky enough to get the full-time night shift replacement, that would amount to approximately $2,400 a month before taxes, maybe $1,900 after taxes. With retirement, that would leave her with about $3,100 a month. After deducting rent, $875, electricity, water, and gas bills, $120, car insurance, $100, phone, $45, and medication, $247, she would have about $700 left for gas, food, and other expenses. The situation was still dire. Survival was still a matter of necessity, but it was better than the $1,247 she was living on now. She got out of bed, took a shower with the lukewarm water that the old building's heater could barely produce, carefully dried her hair, and applied her makeup with a little more precision than usual. Nothing exaggerated. She had learned that too much makeup could be harmful, that older women in the trade should look like Karen grandmothers, not as if they were trying to impress, but enough to look healthy, energetic, and alive. She put on her ironed blouse and khaki pants, slipped on the shoes that gave her blisters, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, she barely recognized the woman staring at her. When had she become so thin? Her face was thinner than before, the weight loss from months of stress and excessive frugality visible in the hollows of her cheeks and the definition of her jaw. Her eyes held a kind of desperate hope that she found somewhat nauseating to look at. She forced herself to smile, the rehearsed smile, the one that said, ... I am competent, energetic, and exactly what you are looking for. And the woman with the desperate look in her eyes in the mirror smiled back. You can do this, she said to her reflection. You can survive this. She grabbed her purse, checked for her driver's license, social security card, cell phone, and the supermarket address. Not that she needed it. She already knew it by heart and headed toward the car. It was 6:47 a.m. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m. She had plenty of time, but she also wanted to arrive early. Not too early. She'd read enough advice about job interviews to know that arriving more than 15 minutes early gave the impression of desperation or instability, but early enough to seem anxious without seeming pathetic. The journey would take about 12 minutes. She would do it twice, maybe grab a coffee somewhere, sit in a parking lot, take a deep breath, and get ready. At 7 a.m., the supermarket parking lot was practically empty. Only a few cars were parked near the employee entrance. Delivery trucks were stopped at the loading dock, and the store lights shone brightly against the gray morning sky. Maggie drove slowly, not wanting to commit to a parking spot yet. She continued to the other side of the parking lot and turned onto the street, driving aimlessly for a few minutes before spotting a McDonald's about a mile away. She stopped the car and parked. She ordered a small coffee and a plain bagel cheaper than an egg sandwich and sat at a table near the window, with her breakfast and her racing thoughts. The coffee was hot and bitter in a way that was somehow comforting. The bagel was soft and bland. She ate slowly, watching the people coming and going from McDonald's, all with somewhere to go, all with a purpose, all with jobs, appointments, or tasks to do. Everyone except her. She checked her cell phone. 7:34 a.m. She had about 2 hours to kill time. She opened her email to reread the message from the supermarket HR department one more time, needing to confirm that it was real, that the interview was actually happening and not something she had imagined. It was real. Her hands trembled slightly as she finished her coffee and bagel and returned to the car. The waiting was the hardest part. Maggie spent the next 90 minutes doing her best to control her anxiety. Sitting in her car in a parking lot near the supermarket, she went over the types of questions she had been asked in previous interviews. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to work here? What do you know about supermarket? Describe a situation where you had to work with a difficult person. She knew how to conduct interviews. She had interviewed a lot of people back in her days at Henderson and Marks. She had been on the hiring side for over a decade. She understood what they were looking for, what answers worked and what didn't, but that was before, when she was a professional. When she had the authority, training, and experience that made all the difference. She was now being interviewed for shelf stocker positions. Now everything was different. At 9:47 a.m., she finally got out of the car and walked towards the supermarket entrance. The employee's entrance was separate from the customer's entrance. It was on the side of the building, through a smaller door that led to a back area with a time clock and a small break room visible through a door. A young woman wearing a Supermart vest and a name tag that read Crystal was near the door, chatting with another employee about her weekend plans. They stopped talking when Maggie approached. "Hello," said Maggie, infusing her voice with warmth and confidence. "I have an interview at 10 with Derek Patterson. Could you show me the way?" Crystal looked her up and down, and Maggie saw that same flash of surprise, quickly disguised. "Oh yes, Derek's in the back offices. You can go through that door over there." Crystal pointed to the inside of the store and asked someone where the management offices are. "I think Derek's in the assistant manager's area today." "Thank you very much," said Maggie. She walked through the door and into the back of the store into a space customers never saw. Concrete floor, fluorescent lights, metal shelves crammed with surplus merchandise. A break room with a refrigerator and a few tables, boxes stacked everywhere. It was a cold, utilitarian, and profoundly unglamorous place. She asked a young man wearing a Supermart vest where the management offices were, and he pointed to a hallway. She walked down at her flat shoes crunching against the concrete floor with every step, her heart pounding harder than it should. She found the management area fairly easily. It was a small suite of rooms with glass-walled offices visible from the hallway. She could see Derek through one of the windows, a man who looked to be about 45 years old, sitting at a desk reviewing something on his computer. He was wearing a blue Supermart polo shirt with the store manager's emblem, and had the relaxed look of someone who had worked in retail long enough for the job to have become routine. Maggie took a deep breath, knocked on the door, and prepared to give the presentation of her life. Derek looked up and she saw him record her age at approximately the same time it had taken Jason to record it 3 months ago. "Margaret?" he asked, rising from his desk. "Yes, hello, thank you so much for having me," said Maggie, extending her hand for a handshake. "I really appreciate this opportunity." His handshake was firm but brief. "Derek Patterson, store manager. Please have a seat." She sat in the chair opposite his desk, trying to maintain her composure, trying not to let her anxiety show. "So," said Derek, leaning back in his chair, "you've been applying for jobs at Supermart for a few months now?" "Yes," Maggie confirmed. "I came in person about 3 months ago to talk to Jason about the available positions, and after that, I applied online several times but didn't get any response. I was very grateful to receive your email on Friday." "Okay, well, your most recent online application was sent to a new HR system we just implemented, so it arrived at headquarters differently than previous ones. That's probably why you received such a sudden response." Derek spoke in that friendly yet slightly condescending tone that management used with lower-level employees. "Actually, we're very happy to have the opportunity to speak with you. We have several open positions at the moment. I'm very interested in any role you might have," Maggie said. "I have flexible hours and feel comfortable with any type of work." "That's great. That's really great." Derek was examining the computer screen. "Here's your resume. 37 years in insurance management, experience in office administration, team leadership, a fairly extensive professional history." "Yes, I spent a lot of time with Henderson and Marks," and then you paused. It was a trick question. In job interview parlance, taking time off often meant there's something wrong with this person. "I was laid off 18 months ago when the company underwent restructuring," Maggie said cautiously. "I worked there for the last decade managing the office for a team of over 40 people. When they decided to adopt a more digital approach, my role became redundant." Derek nodded, his expression neutral. "It's difficult. Structuring is always complicated. Restructuring DOT, as if it had been an act of God rather than a choice made by people like him. People in comfortable positions who decided that efficiency meant eliminating people who were too expensive and knew too much. It was great, but it forced me to think about what I wanted to do next," Maggie continued, sticking to the narrative she had prepared. "And I realized I was looking for an opportunity to get back into direct contact with the customer, to do something more immediate and tangible. Retail seemed like a great option." She looked at Derek's face to see if he believed her. "Not exactly." She sensed the skepticism there, barely disguised beneath the customer service smile. "So you're aware that the positions we have available are entry-level?" he asked. "Cashier, salesperson, customer service?" "I'm fully aware," Maggie said, "and I have a genuine interest in those roles. The starting salary is the minimum wage, US $11.50 per hour, although we offer a raise after the first 90 days if your performance is good. Shifts vary depending on the department and our needs, but we are looking to fill both part-time and full-time positions. Full-time work would primarily involve restocking inventory during the early morning hours. I'm open to any of those options," Maggie said. Derek leaned back slightly in his chair, observing her. "Can I ask you something directly, Margaret?" "Of course. Why do you want to work here? Why, with your experience, would you want to be a cashier at Supermart?" It was the question she both dreaded and prepared to answer. The question that went straight to the point: why would someone with her qualifications want this job? The truth: because I'm broke, desperate, nobody hires me, and I need money to survive, would be a terrible answer. It would confirm all of Derek's suspicions about her desperation, her instability, and the likelihood that she would give up after a few weeks when she found something better. So she lied. I realized that management wasn't fulfilling me, she said. I spent many years in an office dealing with corporate politics and administrative tasks, and I miss being close to people. I miss the immediate gratification of helping someone, of solving a problem, of seeing the direct result of my work. I'm looking for something that gives me more meaning. It was a good lie. She could see Derek considering the possibility, and she could see him wanting to believe it. Because if she were choosing that job, if she truly wanted to be there instead of being desperate and greedy, it would change the narrative. It would make her seem stable, centered, committed. That's interesting, said Derek. I appreciate your honesty. I wasn't being honest with you at all. Maggie thought for a moment, but continued smiling. Well, I think you'd be a good fit for what we're looking for. I'd like you to be interviewed by our assistant manager, Jason Miller, and our customer service supervisor, Teresa Wong. They're responsible for most entry-level hires. Is that okay with you? Certainly, said Maggie. I'd be happy to meet them. Great. I'll go get them. It should only take a few minutes. Derek stood up and left the office. Maggie was left alone, her heart racing, her shoes tight, and the certainty that this was the last obstacle she needed to overcome. She was capable. She had already handled difficult conversations, managed teams, and navigated corporate politics. She could handle 2 managers asking questions. But as it turned out, she didn't succeed, because Jason entered with Teresa about 5 minutes later, and the expression on Jason's face when he saw Maggie was one of pure shock and displeasure, without any disguise. Ah, said Jason, stopping in the doorway of Derek's office. It's you. Teresa, who looked to be in her early 30s, seemed confused. Do you know her? We've met before, Jason said, in a tone that suggested we've met was a generous way of describing their previous encounter, when she came in asking about a job opening. And you didn't hire her? Teresa asked, confused. The online system filtered her out, Jason said quickly. The company's HR department didn't want to proceed with her application. Maggie watched this exchange with a growing sense of dread. She'd made a mistake. Her personal trip to the supermarket that day had been noticed, remembered, and now Jason was clearly angry that she had somehow circumvented his decision. Derek glanced from Jason to Maggie, noticing the tension. So you two have a past? It's not in the past, Maggie said matter-of-factly. Jason helped me with the online application process about 3 months ago. He was very professional and helpful. She watched Jason's jaw clench. He knew she was reframing her rejection as a show of goodwill. He knew she was lying. But he couldn't confront her without seeming petty. Okay, said Jason, then let's begin. The 3 settled into Derek's office, Derek at his desk. Jason and Teresa in the other chairs, Maggie on the edge of the chair, trying to maintain her posture and composure. So, Margaret, let me start by asking about your experience, Teresa said. She seemed kinder than Jason, more genuinely interested. Tell me about your experience in customer service. Absolutely, said Maggie. As an office manager at Henderson & Marks, I supervised customer service representatives, personally handled critical customer calls, and was responsible for implementing systems to improve customer satisfaction. We improved our customer retention rate by 23% over a 5-year period through process improvements that I designed. It was solid. It was impressive, and also completely irrelevant to the job of a supermarket cashier. Teresa seemed to realize this. That's great, she said, but have you ever worked in retail? Serving customers directly at the checkout or on the sales floor? Not in a traditional retail environment, Maggie admitted. But I've worked in customer service my entire career, and I learned very quickly. I'm sure I could familiarize myself with the checkout systems and procedures very quickly. The checkout system is very intuitive, said Teresa. We scan the items, the system shows the total, and the customers pay. It's very simple. The challenge is usually the pace and volume of customers during peak hours. I feel comfortable handling multiple tasks simultaneously, said Maggie. In my previous role, I managed complex schedules for over 40 employees. In addition to answering calls and performing administrative tasks, managing a spreadsheet is different from dealing with an angry customer who thinks the item they bought was charged incorrectly and is threatening. To leave negative reviews, Jason interrupted. It was the first hostile thing he said directly, and it hung in the air between them like a raised hand. Maggie took a deep breath. You're right, it's different. But I think the essential skills are similar. Staying calm under pressure, listening attentively to understand what someone needs, and finding a solution. Our clients can be quite demanding, Jason continued. They're always in a hurry, stressed, and often have unrealistic expectations. Some can even be rude. Do you think you could handle that? The subtext was there. It was unavoidable. Do you think you could handle people being rude to you? Which in fact was a question. Will you fall apart if someone is cruel to you? Which in fact was a question. Do you have enough emotional stability for this job? I've been in the position of irritating customers, Maggie said calmly. In management, you develop a thick skin. You don't take it personally. You understand that it's not about you, but about their frustration or situation. Right, Jason said, as if confirming a suspicion. But our customers are different. Retail customers are a special kind of difficult customer. They come in and say things like, he paused, seemingly for emphasis, I can get that cheaper at Walmart. Or they try to use expired coupons and argue with you for 20 minutes. Or they ask where something is, you tell them, and then they argue that you're wrong even though you're looking at the product right in front of you. It's exhausting. That sounds really frustrating, Maggie said quietly. That's true, Jason confirmed. And I wonder if someone with your experience, someone who used to manage people and make important decisions, would really be willing to tolerate that kind of disrespect. He was provoking her. He was deliberately pressuring her, testing to see if she would give in, if she would become defensive, if she would admit that she was too good for the job and too proud to do it right. Maggie refused to give him that satisfaction. I'm looking for a job, she said simply, and I'm willing to do this work. I understand what the job entails. I'm not going to be resentful or think I'm superior to him. Have you ever worked in retail? Teresa asked, her tone genuinely curious, not hostile, like even if it was just part-time in high school or college. No, Maggie admitted, but I'm capable of learning new skills at any age. It was a straightforward statement, and she deliberately chose the phrase at any age, knowing that both Jason and Teresa would understand. Derek, who had been silently observing the conversation, asked, Your resume indicates that you recently retired. How long ago? It was a matter of testing. Maggie knew that recently retired could mean anywhere from a few months to a few years. But what it really meant was old enough to retire. I was fired 18 months ago, Maggie repeated. I didn't retire voluntarily. The company went through a restructuring. Right, you mentioned that, Derek said. So you've been looking for a job for 18 months? I've been actively looking for 7 months, Maggie said. I spent the first few months believing my experience would be useful for other administrative management positions. When that didn't materialize, I broadened my search. 7 months is a long time to be searching, Jason observed. Is there any specific reason why you haven't found anything yet? The question was intended to humiliate her. He was asking her to explain her failure, justify her inability to find work, admit that there was something wrong with her. Maggie kept her voice steady. The job market has been challenging, especially for someone with my profile. Your profile, Jason repeated. What does that mean? Jason, I think we're getting a little off topic, Teresa said with a disapproving tone in her voice. She had noticed what Jason was doing and she didn't like it. I'm just trying to understand her situation, Jason said with feigned innocence. We're hiring for positions that require a lot of energy and flexibility, and I want to make sure Margaret can handle that. I can handle this, Maggie said, realizing her own voice sounded more strained than she intended. She consciously relaxed her shoulders and forced her breathing to calm down. I understand what the job requires. I'm not looking for benefits or career advancement. I'm looking for a stable job with fixed hours and a salary. Derek watched the scene with the expression of someone witnessing something important and, at the same time, uncomfortable. Right, he said, interrupting. Well, I think that answers most of the questions. Let me ask you one more thing, Margaret. Why now? Why are you so eager to work in retail now after spending most of your career in an office environment? The question was carefully worded. Derek was trying to give her a chance to say something that would make sense of her desperation, that would present her need for that job as something reasonable and explainable. Maggie weighed her options. She could lie again. She could tell a different version of the story about how she had realized what was important and wanted to go back to basics. She could stick to the narrative of conscious choice. Or she could tell him something closer to the truth. I have bills to pay, she said quietly. My husband passed away and I have medical debts, funeral expenses, ongoing expenses. My pension isn't enough. I need to work. The office fell silent. This was real. This was genuine. This was the real reason she was there. And now that she had said it aloud, it hung in the air like an accusation. I'm here because I'm going through a difficult time. I'm here because the system has let me down. I'm here because I have no other choice. Derek's expression changed. There was compassion there now, mixed with something else. Discomfort, perhaps. Or the realization that he was looking at a genuine human being, not an abstract candidate in an interview. Jason's expression became tense. as if her honesty were an unwanted complication. "I'm so sorry about your husband," Teresa said, and she seemed to mean it. "Thank you," said Maggie. "It's been a difficult year and a half." "Well," said Derek, clearing his throat, "I think we have a good idea of your experience and your situation. HR will contact you in the next few days to communicate our decision. We have many candidates to evaluate, but we will certainly keep you in mind. The Human Resources Department will contact you, what it meant to go. Back to the automated system. Go back to the algorithm. Go back to being filtered." Maggie knew how things worked. She would thank them, shake their hands, leave the office, go home, and never hear from them again. But she had already finished. 7 months of rejection. 7 months of applications, interviews, and humiliation. 7 months of lies, acting, and attempts to be something other than what she was. A 52-year-old woman broken by circumstances. Terrified of the future and desperate for a job that barely paid enough to survive. And in that moment, sitting in Derek's office with Jason smiling slightly at her from across the desk, she completely lost the ability to pretend. "You know what?" she said, and her voice was different now. Lower, but somehow more powerful. I understand why you don't want to hire me. I understand the image it projects, the responsibility, the risk. You're considering a woman who's too qualified, whom you think will resent the job, who won't fit in with your younger employees, who might hurt herself lifting something heavy, who might take too much time off due to health problems. Margaret, Teresa began to say, but Maggie raised her hand. "Let me finish. I came in here and lied to you. I said I was looking for purpose and interaction with clients when in reality I'm looking to survive. I'm looking for a way to keep my apartment. I'm looking for a way to continue taking my medication. I'm looking for a way not to become homeless at 62 because the company I dedicated 37 years to decided I was disposable." She stood up, her blistered feet protesting, but her posture remaining upright. "But here's what you need to know. I will work harder than any other employee in your company. I will show up every day. I will learn your systems, deal with your difficult customers, stock your shelves, and operate your cash registers, and I won't quit when a better opportunity arises because, frankly, I don't believe anything better will come along. I'm not looking for a career or a stepping stone. I'm looking for dignity, and I'm looking for a place where people can see me as more than just a problem to be managed." She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "And if that's not what you're offering, then I'm wasting everyone's time by being here." The office was completely silent. Derek looked stunned. Jason looked furious. Teresa looked like she was struggling with something. "I appreciate your honesty," Derek finally said. "Truly. And I want you to know that you're not wasting our time. I'll be very direct with you, and I hope you understand my intention. I want to hire you. But I need to consult the company's HR department to ensure we're following all the correct procedures. Can I do that?" Maggie blinked, not quite understanding what she was hearing. "What?" she asked. "I'll contact our company's HR department to see if there are any problems with hiring you immediately," Derek said. "It might take a few minutes. Are you willing to wait?" She was. Of course she was. She nodded, not trusting her own voice. "Jason, Teresa, can you give us a few minutes?" Derek asked. Jason looked like he was about to protest, but Teresa was already standing. "Come on," she said to Jason. "Let's go get some coffee in the break room." Jason left without saying anything, but his expression indicated that they would talk about it later. When only Maggie and Derek remained, Derek gestured for her to sit down again. She obeyed, feeling that her legs might not have been able to support her if she had remained standing. "That was quite a moment," said Derek. "I'm sorry," Maggie said. "I shouldn't have." "No," Derek interrupted. "I'm glad you did that. I've been in this job for 12 years, Margaret. And in those 12 years, I've seen many qualified people discarded from our system because of their age, appearance, background, or education. And I've seen many unqualified people hired because they're young, cheap, and desperate. Most of them quit within 3 months. They have no work ethic. They have no perspective. They don't understand that a job is a privilege earned through hard work and dedication." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "I think you understand this. I think you'll be a fantastic employee. And I think the company's HR department will wonder why someone wouldn't hire you. So, you're going to offer me the job?" Maggie asked cautiously, unable to fully believe it. "Let me make a call," Derek said. "Give me 5 minutes." He picked up the phone and left the office, leaving Maggie alone with her heart racing and the feeling that something important had changed. She'd been honest. She let her desperation and anger show. And instead of destroying her chances, it somehow opened a door. 5 minutes turned into 7, then into 10. Maggie sat in the office watching the digital clock on Derek's desk, trying not to let her hopes get too high, trying not to anticipate the disappointment. Finally, Derek returned with a neutral expression. Okay, he said, leaning back in his chair. The company's HR department said we need to complete a background check, which will take about a week, and then we need to finalize your paperwork. But depending on that check, we're ready to offer you a full-time position as a sales assistant, with a starting salary of $12 per hour, due to your management experience. Your duties would include restocking shelves, helping customers find products, and conducting inventory. Shifts would be primarily night shifts, 10 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., with some early morning shifts. You would work 5 days a week, which is about 40 hours. It's a solid full-time position with benefits after 90 days. Maggie felt as if she had lost her breath. You, are offering me the job? She asked, just to confirm if it was true. Yes, I am, Derek said. It depends on the background check, but yes, I'm offering you the job. Maggie felt tears burning in her eyes and tried to push them away. Not here, not now, not yet. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you very much. When can I start? Once we've completed the background check and finalized your paperwork, likely next week or the week after, I'll have HR contact you with the details. In the meantime, we need to get your new employee paperwork ready, W-4 form, direct deposit information, emergency contact, all that. Do you have time to do that before you leave today? Of course, said Maggie. Absolutely. Great. I'll ask Teresa to explain this to you step by step. It took 9 days for the background check to be completed and the new employee's paperwork finalized. 9 days of waiting, of compulsively checking your email, of allowing yourself to believe that a future could exist without complete misery. She told Emily everything. She called her that night after the interview and said she'd gotten a full-time job at Supermart, that things were finally looking up. Mom, that's amazing, Emily said, and Maggie could hear the relief in her voice. That's great. You must be so relieved. Yes, said Maggie. It's not much, but it's enough. That's more than enough. It's wonderful. Dad would be very proud of you, Maggie cried after they hung up the phone. Real tears, the kind that welled up from such a deep place inside her that she thought they had dried up months ago. On Monday, November 24th, Thanksgiving week, which somehow seemed to foreshadow something, she showed up for her first shift at Supermart. She arrived at 9:30 p.m. for her 10 p.m. start time, early enough to complete some additional instructions, but late enough that the store was clearly closing. Most of the customers had already left. The cash registers were almost all closed. The store was preparing for its nightly transformation from a public space into a workspace for employees. Derek met her at the employee entrance and walked her through the onboarding process. She signed more forms, filled out the tax paperwork, received her employee badge and her blue Supermart vest. The vest was a medium size and looked a little awkward on her slender frame, but it was official. It was real. She was an employee now. Teresa was there on her first night as her instructor. The older woman greeted her with a warm smile and immediately began explaining the basic principles of how nightly refueling worked. It's not complicated, but it's physical work, Teresa explained, leading Maggie to the warehouse where enormous boxes of merchandise were stacked on pallets. You have the barcode scanner. She showed Maggie how to use the handheld device. You scan each box and it tells you what's inside and where it should go on the shelf. Then you go out and organize the merchandise. We do this all night, going through the store section by section. They started with the grocery section. Teresa showed her how to disassemble a box of canned vegetables and how to organize the shelves correctly, placing the items with the most recent expiration dates at the back and pulling the older ones to the front, and how to use the price tagger if any item needed manual pricing. The first 2 hours were exhausting. Maggie's feet ached, her back ached, her shoulders ached. She moved more slowly than the younger employees, taking longer to process each section, but she was doing the work. She was showing up and performing the service. Around midnight, she sat down in the break room for her 15-minute break and almost cried with relief that she could finally rest her feet. Her blister-covered sneakers had been a terrible choice, and she made a mental note to buy proper work shoes as soon as she received her first paycheck. Teresa sat down opposite her with a cup of coffee from the break room, a horrible, bitter coffee that tasted like it had been made the previous morning. You're doing very well, said Teresa. The first night is always the hardest. Tomorrow will be easier. How long have you worked here? Maggie asked. 12 years, said Teresa. I started as a cashier when I was in college and never left. I like the stability, the hours. I like helping people perform their jobs better. And Derek is a good guy. He really cares about treating his employees with respect. You could tell during the interview, Maggie said. He seemed genuinely interested in solving a problem rather than just following a procedure. That's Derek, Teresa agreed. He's not like many of the managers I've worked with. He really thinks of people as individuals, not as work units. They finished their break and went back to work. The rest of the shift passed in a whirlwind of boxes and shelves, and the endless repetition of scanning, organizing, and restocking products. At 6 a.m., when her shift ended, Maggie felt like she'd been run over by a truck, but she'd made it. She'd worked her first full 8-hour shift. Jason was there at the end of her shift, getting her ready for the start of the next day's shift. When he saw her still wearing her supermarket vest, clocking out, his expression was unreadable. She wanted to say something to him, to show him that Derek had seen something in her that Jason hadn't noticed, to make it clear that she had gotten the job despite his attempts to dissuade her, but she was very tired. So she just nodded respectfully and went to her car. The first week was brutal. Maggie had never worked night shifts in her entire career. Her body struggled to adjust to the inverted schedule. She would arrive home at 6:30 in the morning when the world was waking up, try to sleep during the day, and often find herself lying awake in her dark apartment, her mind racing, overwhelmed by the adrenaline of having survived yet another shift. She developed a sleep pattern of 4 to 5 hours during the day, staying awake for a few hours at night before returning to bed around 8 p.m., where she remained for a few more hours before having to get up and go to the supermarket at 9:30 p.m. It was disorienting and exhausting, but totally worth it. Because every day a little money was deposited into her checking account. She could see her balance growing. $1,247 from Social Security, $480 from her first part-time week at Supermart. Plus, she would receive her paycheck on Friday for the full week. She knew how to do the math. $12 an hour, 40 hours a week minus taxes, would amount to approximately $380 a week, adding $1,520 a month to her retirement income. She would reach a total of about $2,770 a month before receiving her other part-time income. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough. In fact, finally, it was enough. By the end of the second week, she had become more efficient at work. Her body had begun to adapt somewhat, although her feet still ached and her back was still sore. She had bought proper work shoes, black, non-slip shoes suitable for retail at a store in the mall, using the money she had been saving in a jar for a real emergency. Her feet were still tired, but they no longer ached constantly. She also began to get to know her coworkers. Most were young teenagers or people in their 20s who worked to pay for college or supplement their rent. But there was Marcus, a black man in his 50s who worked the night shift restocking shelves and had been at Supermart for 8 years. And there was Delia, a Latina woman who looked to be about 60 and worked as a cashier during the day. And there was Tom Jr., an older white man in his 70s who worked as a cart stocker in the parking lot and came in almost every day to pick up the carts and keep the parking lot clean. They were scattered, not forming a cohesive group of older workers, but they existed. They were there working in minimum or near minimum wage jobs, doing the work that kept the enormous corporate machine running. One day during lunch break, Maggie had lunch with Delia and discovered that Delia had been a high school teacher for 30 years before being asked to retire early when the school district faced budget problems and sought to cut expenses. "I loved teaching," Delia had told her. "I was 14 years away from being eligible for full retirement benefits. But they offered me a package deal, a small one-time payment if I quit immediately. I needed the money at the time. My daughter was having legal problems and needed a lawyer. So I accepted the package and ended up with a much smaller pension than I would have normally received. Now I work here to make up the difference." "How long have you worked here?" Maggie asked. 7 years, said Delia. "I'll probably work until I can't anymore. What's the alternative? I can't retire on what I'm earning. And I can't get a job anywhere else because I'm too old and my retirement is frowned upon in job applications because they think I'm already receiving benefits and shouldn't be working." Maggie had heard similar stories from Marcus, who had been a construction supervisor before back problems made the job unbearable, and who ended up there when he couldn't find work in his field again. "I was 30 years old and they were already trying to retire me," said Marcus. "Now I'm 55, and people are genuinely shocked when they find out my age. They expect me to look, more worn out or something." She realized there was a community of older workers at Supermart, but they weren't visible to most people. They worked different shifts in different sections. They were scattered throughout the store like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit perfectly, but were necessary for the whole thing to function. And they were all there for the same reason as Maggie, because they needed to survive. 3 weeks after starting work at Supermart on a Friday night, shortly before the start of the overnight shift, Maggie was in the break room getting ready to clock in when she overheard a conversation between Jason and another assistant manager named Marcus, different from the Marcus from her other job. This Marcus was around 35 years old and worked the day shift. "I think it's a safety issue," Jason said. "Someone that age doing heavy work for 8 hours straight, a fall, an injury, and we're held responsible. The implications for the insurance company alone are serious." Derek hired her, Marcus interrupted. If Derek thinks she can do the job, I'm not going to question his decision. Derek is too nice, Jason said. He hires based on feelings rather than business logic. This woman has no retail experience, has been unemployed for months, is probably desperate and willing to accept any salary just to feel useful. It's not a good hire. It's not your decision, Marcus said firmly. Derek is the store manager. He made the decision. We support it. But Jason's words lodged in Maggie's heart like a splinter. Desperate and willing to accept any salary just to feel useful. He wasn't wrong. That's exactly what she was. The question was whether that made her a bad employee or exactly the type of employee they should want. Someone grateful, committed, and not looking for a better opportunity that might take her away. She finished clocking in and went to the sales floor to start her shift. That night, around 2 a.m., while she was restocking cereal boxes in aisle 6, a customer entered the store. This was unusual. Supermart closed at 11 p.m., and the night shift staff were supposed to work unsupervised without being observed by customers, except in extreme circumstances. But the customer was there. A woman in her 50s, maybe 60s, disheveled, wearing clothes that looked like they had been worn to sleep, carrying a small child who appeared to be about 4 years old. Maggie watched her from across the hallway, immediately realizing something was wrong. The woman had that specific kind of desperation in her movements that Maggie recognized intimately. The desperation of someone making impossible choices. The woman went to the food section, found an aisle with snacks, and began taking boxes of cookies and granola bars from the shelves. She took them to a corner, sat the child on the floor, and made a small pile of snacks around her. Then she walked towards Maggie. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you closing soon? We need to find a place to stay tonight, and I was wondering if... Are you a customer?" Maggie asked gently, although she already knew the answer. "We arrived before closing time," the woman said. "We were going to leave, but my little boy got tired and asked for a snack, and I didn't know where to go tonight." Maggie looked at the woman's face, at the weariness there, at the way she was trying to maintain some kind of dignity even though she had nowhere to go, and she saw herself, not exactly in the same circumstances, but in the same fundamental situation. A woman without options, doing what she needed to survive. "I'll call someone," Maggie said. "Stay here." She went to look for Teresa, who was restocking the items in the pharmacy section. "There's a customer in the store with a small child," Maggie explained quietly. "I think she might be homeless, or at least without a place to sleep tonight." Teresa's expression changed. She dropped the boxes and followed Maggie to where the woman and child were sitting. "Hello," Teresa said kindly. "I'm Teresa, the supervisor here." "What's your name, Susan?" the woman said. "And this is my son, Michael. I'm sorry we shouldn't be here, but I didn't know where else to go." "Everything's fine," Teresa said. "You're not in trouble. Can I help you? Are you looking for shelter? Do you need resources, or is there anything else I can do for you?" Susan started to cry. "I lost my job 6 months ago. I've been trying to find a new job, but nobody hires me because I'm too old or too qualified, and my references are either too good or too bad, or there's always something wrong. I had some savings, but they're gone. We've been living in my car for 2 weeks. I didn't know what to do anymore." Teresa looked at Maggie, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was making a decision. "Okay," said Teresa. "Let's do this. I'll pick up some toiletries from our store. We have travel-sized products at the pharmacy, and I'll give you the number of a homeless shelter about 8 kilometers from here. They have spaces for families. But first, why don't you fill out an application for a spot here? We're hiring. And honestly, from what you've told me, I think you might be exactly the kind of person we need." Susan looked at her incredulously. "You would hire me? Just like that?" "I'd give you a chance," Teresa said. "Just like Derek gave this one a chance," she pointed to Maggie. "We have a lot of people working here right now who didn't have anywhere else to go, and you know what? They're some of our best employees." Maggie realized that Teresa was creating a narrative, making it clear to Susan that she wouldn't be alone in her circumstances, that other people like her worked there, and that this was normal and acceptable. "Come on, let's fill out some of these registration forms." Teresa took Susan and Michael to the break room where she helped them fill out the Supermart online registration form using one of the employees' computers. "I'll personally recommend you to Derek," Teresa told Susan, "but the system needs to do its job, so you should receive a response in the next few days. In the meantime, accept these resources." She handed Susan a piece of paper with information about shelters, along with a grocery bag filled with travel-sized soaps, shampoos, and other personal hygiene products. "You're being very kind to us," said Susan, tears still streaming down her face. "We've all been where you are," Teresa said simply. "Or we know someone who has. That's how it works working here now. You start seeing each other around. Susan was hired 2 weeks later. She worked the day shift as a cashier, and within a month, she managed to get an apartment, a small one-bedroom apartment where Michael slept in the bedroom and she slept on the sofa, but it was a start. The supermarket employee discount and her stable income made it possible. And after that, something else changed in the store. Derek began hiring people who didn't fit the typical retail profile. A man named Raymond, who was leaving homelessness and securing housing, worked part-time collecting shopping carts. A Latina woman named Rosa, who had been rejected from every other job, now worked in the produce section. An Asian woman named Linda, who had been a successful businesswoman before losing her business and whose age and accent were apparently too much for most employers. Jason protested. He complained to Derek about the risk of hiring unstable or desperate people. He made comments about safety and liability concerns. He suggested that Derek was making decisions based on emotion rather than business logic. But Derek stood firm. "Do you know what good business logic is?" Derek said to Jason one day, loud enough for Maggie to hear from where she was working nearby. "Hiring people who show up for work, who are grateful for the opportunity, who work hard because they understand what's at stake. These employees have the lowest absenteeism rate of any group I've ever managed. They're professional, they're reliable, and they bring a perspective that our younger employees don't have. That's not emotion, that's strategy." 2 months after starting work at Supermart, Maggie received a phone call from Derek. She was sleeping in her apartment, enjoying the few hours of rest she could get between shifts, when her phone rang. It was 1 p.m., and she groped to answer, groggy, worried it might be bad news, a problem at work, a scheduling conflict, something going wrong. "Mrs. Holloway? This is Derek Patterson from Supermart." Maggie sat up in bed, her heart racing immediately. "Hi, Derek, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Actually, I'm calling with a rather unusual proposal. Would you be available to come in today before your night shift? I'd like to talk to you about something." Maggie entered Derek's office at 4 p.m., nervous about what it could be. Derek was sitting at his desk with another man, someone she had never seen before. The man was around 60 years old, professional-looking, wearing a real suit in a way that suggested he didn't work in commerce. "Maggie, thank you for coming," said Derek. "I want you to meet Robert Chun. Robert is the regional director of Supermart. He oversees stores in 3 states. Maggie shook Robert's hand, confused as to why she was being introduced to a regional director. "Robert visited our store this week as part of a routine inspection," Derek continued. "He observed our operations, seeing how our teams work together. And something he noticed is that our store has the highest employee satisfaction rating in the entire region. And we have the lowest staff turnover rate in the region. Furthermore, our customer satisfaction ratings have increased significantly over the last 2 months." "That's wonderful," said Maggie, still not understanding why that specifically interested her. "The question," Robert said quietly with a slight accent that suggested he had grown up somewhere outside the United States, "is why?" Derek and I were trying to understand what had changed, and Derek explained to me that 2 months ago he had changed his hiring practices. He started prioritizing candidates based on commitment and ability, rather than age or conventional academic background. "Ah," said Maggie, beginning to understand. "And we analyzed the data," Robert continued, "and it's remarkable. Your store hired 17 employees in the last 2 months. The average age of these employees is 54. The retention rate for this group is 100%. No one has quit. Meanwhile, the turnover rate for younger employees remains the same as other stores in the region, around 40% over a 3-month period. And customer satisfaction ratings specifically mention helpful and knowledgeable employees and the feeling that our concerns were heard and addressed. This is not language you normally see in Supermart customer reviews." Robert opened a folder on Derek's desk and pointed to some printed documents. "These are the customer satisfaction data from before the change in the hiring team," he said, pointing to a graph. "And these are the data from the last month." He pointed to another graph, showing a noticeable upward trend. "The reason I'm telling you all this," Robert said, "is that Derek told me this change started with you." Maggie felt a chill in her stomach. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Derek told me the story of your interview," Robert said. "How you came in and were honest about your circumstances. How that honesty made him reconsider the type of person Supermart should hire and employ. And then how you started working and demonstrated exactly the kind of work ethic and professionalism that made him confident in extending that philosophy to other candidates." Maggie wasn't sure what she should say. "I'm only telling you this," Robert said, "because I'm taking this information to senior management. I'm recommending that Supermart implement a corporate initiative focused on hiring and retaining more experienced employees. We're going to call it the Experienced Hands Program, and I want you to be a part of it." "Part of it how?" Maggie asked cautiously. "I want you to help us figure out what's working," Robert said. Talk to our HR department about what changes need to be made to the hiring process to make it more accessible to older workers. Help us develop training for managers who may have unconscious bias against hiring older employees. Perhaps eventually you could talk to other stores in the region about what we've learned here. But I'm a salesperson, Maggie said. I restock shelves and help customers find products. I have no experience in HR or training. Actually, Derek interrupted, according to your resume, you have 37 years of experience in office management and team leadership. You've spent a decade training and supervising people. That's exactly the kind of experience we need. Maggie felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. She had been hired to restock shelves, to survive. And suddenly, without even realizing it, she was receiving something that looked very much like an opportunity. What would that imply, she asked. Starting with a transition from the night shift to a different role, Derek said. You would move to the day shift, working in our HR department not as a formal HR professional but as a consultant and liaison. You would help us interview new candidates, train managers, and develop the program. Initially, you would work part-time, perhaps 20 hours a week, and if all goes well, it could become a full-time position with benefits. The salary would be $18 per hour, Robert added, plus mileage reimbursement if we ask you to visit other stores in the area. Maggie did the math. 20 hours at $18 an hour came to $360 a week, about $1,440 a month. That was basically what she was making now on the night shift, but with significantly fewer hours and presumably much less physical exertion. I need to think about this, Maggie heard herself say. Of course, said Robert. Take a few days, but I hope you'll accept, because what you unintentionally started here, Maggie, is important. You've shown us that hiring people based on their value, not their age, generates measurable business results. And in an aging economy where we need workers and workers need jobs, that's something that can really change things. Maggie accepted the job. She received training from the HR department. She worked with Derek to create interview guides focused on actual job aptitude, rather than coded language about energy and culture fit. She worked with managers across the region to help them understand their own biases and how those biases were costing the company money and employees' dignity. She observed the expansion of the Experienced Hands program. Other stores in the region began implementing similar hiring practices. The data started appearing in corporate meetings, business publications, and employee satisfaction surveys. 6 months after her initial conversation with Robert, Maggie was called to the company headquarters in Chicago for a meeting. She met with executives from Supermart, representatives from the HR department, people whose roles she didn't fully understand, but who seemed to be people with power and influence. And they offered him a job, a real job, a senior consultant position in employee relations and inclusive hiring practices, full-time, $55,000 per year, benefits, retirement plan, a real career. Maggie, sitting in a corporate conference room wearing a blazer she had bought for the occasion, felt tears welling up in her eyes. Why me? She asked. I'm not qualified for this position. I don't have a background in HR. I don't have corporate experience. You're qualified because you've experienced the problem and understand the solution, said the vice president of HR. You've worked with real employees, real managers, real stores. You understand the barriers from the inside. And frankly, you bring a credibility that someone with a traditional HR background might not have. When you talk to a manager about the value of hiring more experienced workers, they listen because they know you've actually done the work, not just read about it in a training manual. 3 weeks after Maggie accepted the job at the company, Jason Miller was fired. The information came to light in a company memo that Maggie discovered through Derek. Jason had been fired for a consistent pattern of discriminatory hiring practices and had been reported to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission (EEOC) by several former applicants, including some who were part of the original group of older workers that Maggie hired with Derek. The company was facing a potential class action lawsuit related to age discrimination and was taking steps both to correct the problem and to demonstrate to regulators that they were taking it seriously. Maggie felt a complex mix of emotions about it. She didn't want Jason to lose his job, but she also couldn't deny that it was an appropriate consequence for what he had done, for the way he had deliberately tried to prevent people like her from working. What happened next, however, surprised everyone. Susan, the woman who was living in her car and who passed by the store late at night, filed a formal complaint with the EEOC Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She claimed that when she applied for a job at Supermart, she was immediately discriminated against because of her age and because she was considered homeless. She stated that she was only hired thanks to Derek's personal intervention and that many other older applicants were rejected by the online system without any human evaluation. The complaint was supported by Raymond, the supermarket employee who was leaving the streets and working as a shopping cart attendant. By Rosa, the Latina woman who had been denied jobs everywhere else. By Delia, who worked at Supermart for 7 years as a cashier and documented several instances where she was passed over for supervisory positions in favor of younger, less experienced employees, and by Maggie. Maggie, who is now a corporate consultant earning $55,000 a year, filed a complaint about her own hiring experience, detailing months of rejection from other retail companies, online application filtering based on age, and the excuses in coded language used to avoid hiring her. The legal process that followed became something much bigger than just Supermart. The case became a case study on age discrimination in retail, attracting national attention. News outlets reported on it. Legal experts wrote about it. Members of Congress mentioned it in speeches about labor rights. Maggie found herself being interviewed by the national media. How does it feel to be part of a legal process that could change hiring practices across an entire industry? A reporter asked her. I feel justified, Maggie said simply. For months, I couldn't get a job. I applied for 93 positions. I had 31 interviews, and I was told in so many different ways that I wasn't wanted, that I was too old or too experienced or too expensive, or that I didn't have the necessary energy. And what this process showed is that I wasn't alone. There were thousands of people like me, and we were being systematically excluded from jobs we wanted, jobs we could do, jobs we needed. Do you think Supermart is a bad company? The reporter then asked. I think Supermart is a company that needed to be forced to change, Maggie said cautiously. Derek Patterson tried to change things from within the store, but it was only when the data showed it was profitable, when the metrics proved that older workers were good for business, when the legal consequences became real, that the parent company acted. So, I think the problem is the system. The system that allows companies to profit from discrimination. The system that filters human beings through algorithms without any human judgment. The system that allows age to become an indicator of all the things they really want to discriminate against. Poverty, homelessness, supposed lack of energy without needing to say it out loud. 5 years after Maggie walked into Supermart for that first interview, the Experienced Hands program had expanded to 400 Supermart stores in 12 states. The litigation had been resolved. Supermart agreed to pay $47 million in damages to employees and applicants who suffered age discrimination. The company implemented drastic changes to its hiring practices, removing age filtering from its online application system, requiring human review of all applications, and implementing training for managers on unconscious biases. Maggie had been promoted to Director of Inclusive Workforce Development at Supermart, overseeing the implementation of the program nationwide. Her salary had increased to $120,000 per year, plus stock options and benefits. She had a 401k retirement plan with matching contributions from the company. She had a health plan that covered her medications. She had a retirement plan. But more than that, she had a purpose. Every day, she worked with retailers and corporate leaders on the business arguments for hiring and retaining older workers. She spoke at industry conferences about demographics, how the American workforce was aging, and how companies that failed to adapt to this reality would face labor shortages and productivity problems. She traveled to stores across the country, meeting employees like Raymond, Rosa, Delia, and Susan. They were all still working, all had been promoted or taken on leadership roles, all had received the dignity of employment and the ability to support themselves. Susan had become a supervisor. She enrolled in a community college with financial aid from Supermart and was studying business administration. Her son, Michael, was thriving at his new school, had friends, stability, and a bright future. Delia had trained dozens of new employees and became known as the unofficial moral compass of her store, the person managers turned to when they needed wisdom and perspective. Raymond had become a facilities coordinator, managing parking operations, building maintenance, and the store's physical infrastructure. He had acquired his own apartment, reconnected with his adult children, and rebuilt his life. And Maggie recovered what she thought she had lost forever: purpose, rent, respect, the certainty that she had value in the world. One afternoon, about 6 years after she started working at Supermart, Maggie was in her office at company headquarters when she received an unexpected visitor, Jason Miller-Era. She barely recognized him. He had aged considerably in the 6 years since she last saw him. His hair was completely gray. His face was weary. He looked like a man who had been through hard times. "Jason," she said carefully, gesturing for him to sit down, "what brings you here?" "I wanted to apologize," he said bluntly. "I wanted to come to the company headquarters and apologize to you for the way I treated you." Maggie didn't quite know what to say. "I've had a lot of time to think about it," Jason continued. "After I was fired, I had a really hard time finding work. It turns out that being fired for age discrimination makes you virtually impossible to get hired. Nobody wanted to hire someone with that kind of history. I was unemployed for 14 months. My wife and I almost lost our home. I went through a severe depression. I went to therapy. I took medication, you name it." He paused, looking at his own hands. "And during that time, I realized how what I had done contributed to situations like this. How I discriminated against people like you without even thinking about it, without even recognizing that it was discrimination. I simply thought I was doing my job, following company guidelines, hiring the best candidates. But I was filtering people based solely on age and assumptions about what it meant to be old." "I'm glad you've come to that conclusion," Maggie said, and she meant it. "I also wanted to tell you," Jason said, "that I got a job, finally. I'm working as a recruitment consultant for a nonprofit that helps unemployed people, mostly older workers, get back into the workforce. It's not as well paid as my old job, but it's rewarding. And I'm using what I learned from my layoff to help people. I tell them my story, and it helps them understand that they're not alone. That age discrimination is real and structural, not personal." "It looks like good work," said Maggie. "Yes, it is," Jason confirmed. "And I wanted you to know that I'm grateful for that, for forcing me to confront my own biases, even though I resisted you every step of the way. The Experienced Hands program has become a case study in business schools." The numbers were convincing. Supermart stores with the Experienced Hands program showed customer satisfaction rates 68% higher than stores without the program. The turnover rate among older workers hired through the program was 12%, compared to 38% for younger workers in similar positions. Older employees stayed with the company for an average of 4.2 years, compared to 1.8 years for younger employees. Stores with teams of different age groups reported fewer conflicts in the workplace and greater overall employee satisfaction. The program generated positive media coverage, estimated at $4.2 million United States dollars in free advertising for Supermart. In surveys, customers reported feeling more welcomed and helped by more experienced employees, citing the knowledge and patience they demonstrated. But beyond the statistics, there was the human impact. More than 6,000 workers over the age of 50 were hired through the Experienced Hands program at Supermart stores nationwide. The average age was 58. 60% of them were women. 40% had been unemployed for more than 6 months when they were hired, and almost all of them were still employed. The program inspired imitations. Other retail chains began implementing similar initiatives. Walmart launched its own age-inclusive hiring program. Target began working with organizations focused on older workers. Fast food chains began rethinking their hiring practices. It wasn't a universal practice. Many companies still discriminated based on age. Many still filtered resumes using algorithms that coded energy, fitness with company culture, and other indicators of youth. Many still trained their managers to view older workers as risky, expensive, and inflexible. But the scenario had changed slightly, marginally. Enough that an older worker looking for a job had slightly better chances than before. Emily came to visit her mother in Chicago, where Maggie's company office was located. They dined at a nice restaurant, the kind of place Maggie could never have afforded on her pension alone, but which was now within her budget. Emily looked at her mother across the table and said something Maggie needed to hear. "You saved my life," Emily said. "What?" Maggie asked, confused. "You saved your own life by working hard and building a family and—" "No, Mom, when you were going through hard times, when you were unemployed and barely able to pay the bills, I was terrified. And I felt guilty because I couldn't help you, because you wouldn't let me, because you kept telling me everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And I was also angry, to be honest. Angry because the system let you down, angry because you had to work so hard just to survive, angry because my successful daughter couldn't help her elderly mother." Emily paused and took a sip of water. "But you didn't ask me for help. Instead, you went to that supermarket that Monday, were honest with Derek, and told him the truth. And instead of accepting a job that would destroy you, giving up, or ending up on the streets like so many people do, you turned your survival into a movement. You turned your desperation into a career. You turned your age from an obstacle into an advantage." "I didn't plan any of this," said Maggie. "I know you didn't want to, but you did it anyway. And now I don't have to worry about you. And more than that, you helped thousands of other people who would have ended up like you. You changed the system, even if only a little, and that's extraordinary." Maggie started to cry. "Dad would be so proud," Emily continued. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. And you are. You are the strongest person I know. Maggie was on a podium in front of an audience of 2,000 retail industry leaders, corporate executives, HR professionals, and business journalists. She was 69 years old now. Her hair was completely white, something she had stopped fighting and now wore in an elegant bob. She wore glasses for reading, but not for seeing things at a distance. She still worked, still had energy, still had a purpose. 7 years ago, I walked into a supermarket looking for a job, she began. I was 62 years old. One had been unemployed for 7 months. I applied for 93 positions and went to 31 interviews. All of them resulted in rejection. Not because I wasn't qualified. Not because I didn't have the skills, experience, or ability to do the job. I was rejected because of my age. The audience remained silent. I was rejected so consistently and systematically that I began to internalize the message. I was worthless. I was too old, too expensive, too inflexible. The job market decided I didn't belong there, and I started to believe it. She took a deep breath. What changed was meeting Derek Patterson, a store manager who was willing to give me a chance. Not because I was charitable, not because he felt sorry for me, but because he saw potential in me that others didn't. And what happened after that is what I want to talk to you about today. Because what happened in that supermarket wasn't random or sentimental, it was economically viable. She analyzed the statistics, the retention rates, the improvements in customer satisfaction, the productivity increases, the business arguments for hiring older workers. But here's what the statistics don't tell you, Maggie said. They don't tell you about Susan, who lived in her car with her 4-year-old son when she applied for the job at Supermart. Now she's a supervisor and a college student. Her son is thriving. She has a home and a future. They don't talk about Raymond, who had been homeless for 2 years before we hired him. Now he's a facilities coordinator and has reconnected with his family. They don't talk about Delia, who spent 30 years as a teacher and thought her career was over when the school district forced her to retire early. She's been at Supermart for 10 years and is one of our most valuable employees. And they don't tell me anything about me. They don't tell me that I almost lost everything, that I thought about suicide more than once during those months of rejection, that the only reason I'm here today is because one person decided to see me as something beyond my years. Maggie noticed that the people in the audience were getting emotional. Age discrimination is not just a moral issue, she continued. It's an economic issue. It's a demographic issue. It's a crisis waiting to happen, because the American workforce is aging. By 2030, the number of workers over 55 will surpass the number of workers between 25 and 54 for the first time in history. This is not a problem to be managed. This is a reality to be faced. She walked towards her conclusion. I'm here to say that hiring older workers is not an act of charity. It's good business. It's ethical business. And it's a necessary business if you want to survive the next decade of economic and demographic change. The question isn't whether you can afford to hire older workers. The question is whether you can afford not to hire them. After the main lecture, Maggie was approached by a young man in his early 30s who seemed vaguely familiar to her. Miss Holloway, he said. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm a recruiter at Walmart. I'd like to talk to you about something. Of course, said Maggie, shaking his hand. When you were looking for a job 7 years ago, you applied to Walmart, the recruiter said. I was one of the people who screened your application. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. And I wanted to tell you that because of your work, because of the Experienced Hands program, Walmart implemented similar changes. And now I have a completely different job where instead of screening people, I help select people. I'm part of the team that works on our inclusive hiring initiatives. Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes. What's your name? She asked. Tyler, he said. Thank you for telling me that, Tyler, Maggie said. And thank you for changing what you're doing. This matters more than you realize. That night, Maggie sat in her hotel room, a nice hotel room, the kind she could now afford, and thought about the trip. From that day, 7 months after the start of her unemployment, when she walked into the Supermart with her printed resume and desperate hope, to this moment where she is a nationally recognized expert on age discrimination and inclusive hiring, where she is changing systems and helping thousands of people. She thought of Tom and how he would have loved to see this, how proud he would have been of her. She picked up her cell phone and opened the photos. There was a picture she had recently taken of all the main members of the Experienced Hands team: Derek, Teresa, Susan, Raymond, Delia, and herself. They had succeeded. Against all odds, against a system created to exclude them, against all the barriers that the modern economy had erected, they had succeeded. They survived. They thrived. They changed things. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would have made the world a slightly better place. Margaret Holloway had learned something fundamental about the nature of human value and economic systems. She had learned that age discrimination wasn't really about age. It was about invisibility, about the economy's desire to replace experience with cheaper, submissive labor, about a culture that valued novelty over wisdom, energy over ability, youth over character. She had learned that the system could be changed, but only when the economy aligned with ethics. Only when someone was willing to analyze the data and see the human beings. Only when the honesty of a single person could unmask the carefully constructed narratives that justified exclusion. She had learned that despair was not shameful, that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was tell the truth and refuse to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. And she learned that, in the end, age wasn't a disability. It was an asset. It was knowledge, perspective, and resilience gained over decades of life. It was a value that the market had systematically underestimated and devalued. The Experienced Hands program had expanded. Other companies copied it. Bills were introduced in Congress based on research generated by Supermart's data. Age discrimination in hiring was still widespread, but now there were people, thousands of them, who had a chance because the narrative had shifted somewhat. And at the heart of this change was a woman who had been told she was worthless, who had believed it for a terrifying moment, and who then chose to prove them all wrong, not through individual achievements, but through systemic change. Because that's what real change looked like. Not a woman overcoming age discrimination. A woman transforming the system that created age discrimination. This is not a single story of exceptional resilience. It is a movement of ordinary people demanding dignity. On what would have been Tom's 70th birthday, Maggie returned to the supermarket where her journey had begun. It was the original store, the one in the mid-sized American city where she had first walked in with her printed resume and her desperate hope. Derek was still the store manager. In the 7 years since Maggie had been hired, he had become something of a legend in the retail industry. Other companies were recruiting him, offering him higher-paying positions. But he had stayed at Supermart because he believed in what they were building. Teresa was now the assistant store manager, the first person hired through the Experienced Hands program to be promoted to a management position. She had implemented training for other managers, helping them to recognize and combat their own age-related biases. Susan was a store supervisor and was finishing her technical course. Michael was in high school, an exemplary student, and planned to attend a good college. Delia had worked there for a decade and was known to all the store's customers as the person you went to for advice. She had trained over 100 employees over the years and never missed a single shift. Raymond had been nominated for Supermart's Employee of the Year award. He had reconnected with his adult children and now saw his grandchildren regularly. And in the back office there was a wall covered in photos. Not corporate photos, not marketing photos. Real photos. Photos of employees at their desks, at the cash registers, restocking shelves. Photos with names, hire dates, and stories. One of them showed Maggie on her first day. Her feet shod in those flat shoes that gave her blisters, and a hesitant but determined smile. The caption below the photo read, "The beginning of the hands-on training program. Maggie Holloway. Hired in October 2018. Changed everything." Maggie stopped in front of that wall and allowed herself to remember. She remembered the despair, the rejection, the feeling of being invisible, unwanted, obsolete. She remembered Derek's question, "Are you aware that the positions we have available are entry-level?" She remembered Jason's cruelty, his attempts to dissuade her, his resistance to change. She remembered the night she worked her first shift, her feet aching, her body complaining, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. She remembered meeting Susan late at night in the store, recognizing herself in another woman's despair. She remembered the moment Derek offered her the job at the company when she realized that survival could become a purpose. She remembered the legal process, the media attention, the realization that her personal struggle was linked to a much larger systemic problem. And she remembered Tom hugging her on that terrible day she was fired, saying everything would be all right, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be, not knowing that his death would become the catalyst for her transformation. That afternoon, Maggie was in the supermarket parking lot and called her daughter. "Hi, Mom," Emily replied. "How are you?" "I'm in the store where it all began," Maggie said. "I'm standing in the parking lot where I parked my car 7 years ago, terrified, desperate, thinking this was my last chance," and asked Emily even though she already knew the story. "And it really was," Maggie said. "It was my last chance. And I took it. And that changed everything." There was a moment of silence on the line. "I'm proud of you," Emily said. "I know I've told you this before, but I need to say it again. I'm very proud of you." "Thank you, my dear," Maggie said. "That means everything to me." After they hung up the phone, Maggie stood in the parking lot for a few more minutes. watching the afternoon light fall obliquely on the building, watching the customers come and go, watching her coworkers, her friends, really working inside, serving the customers, being the backbone of the economy that too often tried to make them invisible. She reflected on the universal truth that emerged from her experience. The system tells you that you're worthless. The system encodes your age into algorithms and filters you out before human eyes even see you. The system says you're too experienced, too expensive, too inflexible. The system whispers that your best years are behind you. And then if you're lucky, if you're brave, if you find someone willing to see you as something beyond the judgment of the system, you'll realize the truth. You're not outdated. You're not disposable. You're not too old. You're not superfluous. You are exactly enough. And when enough people start to believe this, when enough companies start to implement it, when enough systems start to change, the world transforms. And suddenly, all those people who were told they had no value, no future, no place in the world, they are no longer just surviving. They are thriving, and they are changing everything.